Good afternoon. Thank you for coming back. I think I can hear myself talk. So I asked whether or not I could introduce Chris John this afternoon. I've worked around him for probably 8 years. I love his sentiment that life is for living, and he certainly is doing that as he goes from strength to strength. He's a private psychotherapist, but probably some of his strongest work comes from the intensive groups that he does, and he does those in the UK, in Iceland, and further afield. We always said that we'd like to present on stage together one day and do a kind of bit of a song and dance. He's a great theatrical. He's a great entertainer, and I love watching him. I love working with him. I've had the pleasure to be part of his intensive trauma reduction work, and also to see him presenting at various conferences. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Chris John. Have a thoroughly great time, because life is for living.
Ta-da. And life is for living, guys. Thank you, Sam, for a wonderful introduction. I'm trying to follow that now. I'm a bit lost. Why am I here? Can you hear me okay? I don't know which one to use. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All good. One of the things I've learned over the years of working with people is that the thing we fear most is the thing we want most, and that's connection. And I'm a great believer that a lot of addiction, if not all addiction, comes from trauma. And it's the trauma of attachment, the trauma of not having good enough attachment, and also what we call transgenerational trauma. To define trauma is a natural reaction to an unnatural event or response that is overwhelming the system. We can have acute trauma. Acute trauma might be a one-off incident, a road accident, any kind of thing, a robbery, a mugging on the street can be acute trauma. We have chronic trauma, which is life-threatening events. Transgenerational trauma occurs when the trauma is passed down through the family system. I find it very difficult. I'm normally used to running around on stage, so staying still for me is very, very hard. So bear with me. What is the population? Are you psychotherapists? Are you doctors? Can you have some hands up here? Sort of psychotherapists, medical, okay. Working, let me just start again because I'm getting a bit sort of lost here. I did have some slides, but I don't know where they are. So I'm going to have to do this all from memory. I started working as a psychotherapist about 15 years ago, and I was invited out by a colleague to the Meadows in Arizona. And I was so confident that I knew everything I needed to know about psychotherapy and working with people. I said, yeah, fantastic. And in my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to go to the Meadows in Arizona, and I'm going to lay in the sun. When we arrived in Arizona, I bought myself suntan lotion. I was so confident I knew everything I needed to know. And I went to work with train with Pierre Melody, who was facing codependency. Do you know Pierre Melody's work? Anybody? Yeah. It was inner child work and things, and I was thinking, inner child work, what does she know? I didn't realize at the time that was my own inner child sort of kicking off. So in spite of everything, within 3 days of being in the training, I realized how special the work that she had, or the model she designed was. Because within 3 days, I started to think differently about myself, about my relationships, my family. And I know it's sort of been mentioned, but my role in the family, who was I and why was I that particular role? And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is how we work with trauma, how transgenerational trauma, how trauma comes in through the family system, and importantly, how we work with it. For anybody working, I believe, as a therapist, it's about the relationship we develop with our clients. It's about that connection. When somebody sits down in front of us, whether it's in a group or whether it's one-to-one, they are giving us the most wonderful gift, if we take it, is their vulnerability and their trust. And it's up to us to nurture that. It's up to us to really honor that and to work with that. Working with trauma, sometimes it's very, very obvious. Somebody comes in with something. It could be, an abuse, an obvious abuse. It can be, love addiction. It can be sexual abuse. It can be, physical, spiritual abuse. And they can be very obvious. But a lot of the time it's looking to see where that abuse comes from. Most adults do not wake up in the morning and think, right, I'm going to fuck up your day. They do it by mistake. Most adults lose it. They lose their shape because there's something going on in their lives that the children or their children they take out. As a psychotherapist, a therapist, a counselor, we need to be like detectives. We need to find out everything we can about our client. The family of origin is so, so important. But before we even get there, the most important piece of work any of us can do is to work on ourselves. Without working on ourselves, and some people can roll their eyes and think, without working on ourselves, we will be blocked. We'll either be doing our mother and father's issues and trying to sort those out vicariously through our clients, or we'll end up, blocking the client and stopping them going somewhere. When we work on ourselves, we can discover our own trauma reactions. We can discover where we are in fight, flight, or freeze. So, for example, I still am. I am the youngest of 9 children. So my trauma reaction was I can't fight my brothers, so I would run. So my trauma reactions, if you see me heading for the door, I'm in a trauma reaction, so bear with me. I would run. Even today, so confrontation today is hard for me. I want to run. If I've got to ring up, make a phone call about the engine that's just blown up my car, I'm like, wanting someone else to do it for me. But in fact, I did. I got my brother-in-law to do it for me. He's a mechanic, so he knows these things. I just realized that. It was a trauma reaction. So as therapists, if we know our trauma reactions and we really start to get attuned to that, we know when we are being triggered in the room. In order to find out our own trauma reactions, we need to do our own family of origin work. And the thing I love about Pia Melody's work in particular, it's not about blaming. We don't look back in the family and start saying, oh yeah, it's because mum did this, or dad did that, or didn't do this. It's like, what happened and why? When we become good detectives, we sit with our clients, and they will tell us everything we need to know. I had a lovely story last night at dinner about a gentleman who took a year to find out a particular story for his wife. Every now and again, his wife would tell him something about her past, and he made a note of it. And about a year later, he wrote a story and shared it with her. So every day, or every week, she was telling him, so she was letting him in, And that's what we need to be as therapists. We need to be able to sit there and listen to the clues, listen to what's going on. We need to know our own vulnerabilities before we can meet somebody else's vulnerability. And it's not about being so walled off. This is for me anyway. I mean, if you're a psychoanalyst and you sit there and there's nothing wrong with psychoanalysts, by the way. But if, some people work differently. I work very, very relationally. I want to be with my client. I want to be in there with them as far as I can be, And I think this is the only way, for me anyway, that we can actually deal with developmental trauma. We need to be able to walk every step with our client. If I'm frightened of something in my past, I'm not going to go there. If I'm frightened of something in my past, I'm going to steer you left when you want to go right, or when you need to go right. So the first important thing is really about starting to look at how you do your work. See what it's like to be vulnerable, see what it's like to be open, see what it's like to be cared for. Because one thing as therapists aren't very good at is looking after ourselves. We look after so many other people, and when it comes to us, I can see some nodding little eyes and grins there, It's like, oh no, I'm fine, I'm okay. So that's the first important thing. If you're going to work with developmental trauma, is really about looking at yourself, One of the things that trauma sets up, developmental trauma in particular, is shame. We have what we call a shame bind, And we feel shame. We feel that all the time. And it's normally carried shame. And do you ever understand the concept of carried shame? So if a major caregiver doesn't look after their shame, they're loose with it, a child will pick it up. So a shaming act can be saying, you're no good, you're stupid, you're bad. And of course you pick that shame up. And we start to believe that you're stupid, no good or bad. But there's also other sort of forms of shaming where a parent kind of turns their back on. I'm still talking. Turns their back on a child. So the child again starts to absorb that feeling that they're no good. When a child experiences developmental trauma, it's usually from the major caregiver's past. So when we look at transgenerational trauma, and I do have slides, I promise you, if you email me, you will have them, or email iCAAD and you will have them. Transgenerational trauma is something we've worked with for the last 12 years, knowingly. And the fantastic thing at the moment, science is showing that trauma doesn't change the DNA, but epigenetic science leaves I can't remember the word is, markers in the body. So we are then more susceptible to trauma reactions. And the exciting thing about that is it really then helps to remove the shame of a lot of people come in and say, I'm stupid, I'm a failure, I'm no good. But it literally is in the DNA, Trying to explain that to a client and having scientific backup makes a great difference, makes a big, big difference. So developmental trauma, transgenerational trauma go hand in hand in my experience. So if a parent has been traumatized in their life, even if the child is unaware of it, the child will have some kind of known part of them. And it's almost like they need to prove that. So children will push and prod the parent, until the parent I'm not blaming the child, by the way, but there'll be this kind of dance. The child will become a particular way until this trauma is activated. Because it's almost like the child is holding on to something. They don't know what they're holding on to, and they don't know why they feel different, but they do feel different. And then all of a sudden you will say that mum shouts at the child and that trauma is reactivated. And it's almost like an internal release. It's like, I feel better now for the time being. Yeah? Transgenerational trauma, we spoke, I think, in one of the slides today, I think I wish I had your slides too, is, we know that male children of survivors of the Holocaust are more prone to depression and to mental health issues because of the trauma the family went through. when we start working with it, and this is the beautiful thing about working with this kind of trauma. When we start finding out, when we are the detectives, we find out, we help the clients find out where this comes from, where it stems from, you can really feel a sense of understanding, and the work motors forward. Because with the concept of carried emotions, we are always trying to heal something for the parent. We're always trying to do their work without even knowing it. You know? So trauma itself, if you think of developmental trauma, it affects the whole system. It doesn't just affect the cognitive. You know, if I get a beating, it's not just my body that's going to go into pain. I'm going to make up something about myself. My emotional state is changed. Every part of my system would be changed during that beating. Now, of course, I can brush myself down and I can carry on and I can go through life and then until the next incident occurs. Do you know the work of Peter Levine, everybody? Peter Levine, I think, Waking the Tiger was his first book, was brilliant because it showed how our bodies store trauma. And it has this lovely thing where you have this little gazelle eating the grass, munching away, chatting away to his gazelle friends. And all of a sudden, there's a lion in the background. Oh! And all of a sudden, a lion comes, the gazelle runs off. This little gazelle is there like, oh, I'll be with you, mate. There's one more bit of grass, and then the gazelle is caught with the lion. The lion pulls him down, and the gazelle pretends, goes into freeze. That's the gazelle trauma response, is freeze. And the lion thinks, oh, that was easy. I'm going to get another one. You know, I'll have him tomorrow. So the lion stalks off. The lion, where's my lion? Roaring, right? And this little gazelle goes like this. Ah, do you? And runs off. And what Peter Levine done in his studies, he saw how the animal shook. You know, for 20 minutes later, after being grabbed by a lion, this gazelle would be there, a little shake. And there'd be no sign of trauma. There'd be no sign of stress. You know? None whatsoever. So this is why a lot of workers, I'm saying that for a reason, is that when we work with trauma, we have to start thinking top down, bottom up. CBT, you know, EMDR, all these things, fantastic, you know. Psychoanalysts, every approach you can bring to the table. But don't think that one approach alone is going to be enough. And this is where I think the skill of therapy and therapists working together can change a lot of this developmental trauma. And the reason we say this about transgenerational trauma crossing over, when we do this work with our clients, it stops it going into the next generation. It literally changes those DNA markers because the behavior of that person changes. When a child experiences less than nurturing events, so, you know, a child that is blamed, shamed, beaten, assaulted, abused, one of the things there's two emotions a child carries. One is shame, because they're disempowered. And if you think of an adult screaming at a child, and you see it on the road, you know, sometimes you see a crazy parent screaming at their child, and the child is frozen. And the mother or father or the caregiver is being shameless in that moment. And it's almost as if all that shame is being poured into the child. And you see it. They walk back. And the mother's dragging them. That shame itself stays with the child. And that becomes a sort of traumatic bonding. And we need to start to understand how we work with that. Now, cognitively, you know, CBT, you can do some ABC, activating belief in consequences. There's lots of things you can do. All valid. But that's just going to change here for a while. You know, it might change the behaviors. And sometimes it can last weeks, sometimes it can last months and years. But normally, something will come up and it will pop. It will take us back to where we were. You could work somatically. You can work somatically with it, where all of a sudden you just look at the body work, and and it's brilliant, but then you don't look at the cognitive. You don't address this. Working with a sort of top-down, bottom approach, we're all the time, we're monitoring, we're looking, we're learning. And one of the fantastic things is if you do your own work, you can take yourself into that session. You will start to experience empathically what the other person is feeling. You see, we are nothing more than energy. You know? How many of you have been out and about, and you've been having a little drink at the bar or maybe sitting down chatting, and you just feel somebody, you just know somebody's looking at you. Have you ever done that? Have you had that experience? And you turn around and, wow, look at him looking at me. Think, ooh, does my house look big in this? You think, wow, look at this, or whatever it might be. Or you've done something wrong. And as you go home, you walk up the garden path, you know that they know. We've all done it, haven't we? Well, I haven't, because I was a very good child. Or you walk at home and you maybe mum and dad, or dad and dad, or mum and mum, whoever it is, all of them, they're all there. You just know that something's wrong. You say, everything okay, mum? Yes, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. Ask your father. We've all kind of been in these situations where our body then starts to react. A top-down, bottom approach means that if you do your work, you won't be afraid to go near that. You'll allow yourself that empathic tuning, which all of a sudden you say, actually, I can feel that in my body. You can sit there and monitor and be with people. Pia Melody writes that abuse is anything less than nurturing. And I love that term because as a parent or as a caregiver, our roles are to nurture our children, to prepare them for the world. And when we look at the different levels of abuse, we're looking at physical, spiritual, intellectual, dependency, financial. There's all these different levels of abuse that children suffer. And it becomes traumatic. Because the child, remember, children are egocentric. A child can't wake up in the morning and think, oh, mum and dad's having a bad day. It's, what have I done? What have I done to upset mum today? Why is dad always shouting at me? Why doesn't he like me? What's wrong with me? Why is mum and dad, why are they fighting all the time? Why wouldn't they, what have I done to upset them? Children don't think, oh, dad's had a busy day, he must have a hard day. He's little 5-year-old is there. Yeah, he's all okay. And that becomes the trauma. And very often in a family system, you will discover through family of origin work what was going on for dad, what was going on for mum, what was life like for them. Because we don't do anything new. We run these patterns over and over and over again. At home, I'll share a story with you. I live in London, and London is full of black cabs. Well, not full, there's other cars, but there's loads of black cabs in London. And I couldn't get in a black cab. And I remembered once, when I was about 16, 17, my first job, I was in Wales, which is not London, but I was in Wales, and I had a taxi from town back to the village. I was like the kid, he had a new shirt, I was going out that night, I was gorgeous, and I was grown up. I'm having a taxi because I'm independent. When I pull up outside the house in this taxi, feeling like the kiddie, my dad is on the gate. And my dad was brought, he was from the war, his parents were in the war, so they were brought up with very little. Truly, there were times in my childhood when we had no food. So a taxi was quite extravagant, even at 17. And my dad shamed me in such a way for having a taxi. What do you think you're doing? And the taxi driver's still there. And the taxi driver's, oh my God, you know? It was awful. He was like, what do you think you're doing? Wasting money. And it completely destroyed me. It was a trauma response. I couldn't go out that night. You know, I had all my new clothes or the bag. And it was only when Uber came out could I take taxis. So God bless Uber. And that's a true story. I could not get into a taxi. Just couldn't do it, you know? And when Uber came out, I'd already been a therapist for like 10 years. So even working on my stuff couldn't get me in there. Yeah? And this is how, you know, I'm sharing that story because for some people, their dad shouting them on the gate having a taxi wouldn't mean anything. Yeah? Some people look at us and say, crazy, you know. But for me, and this is the other thing I want you to think about, when our clients sit in front of us and tell us what their trauma is, it's up to us to really accept their reality of it. We don't have to feed into it. We don't have to make it bigger than it is. We can share our reality of something. But if somebody has had a really traumatic response, so for example, my dad shouting at me wasn't just about the taxi, because I know this is going to be hard to believe. My dad shouted at me before about other things, and they haven't affected me. What my dad was doing, he was passing his trauma onto me overtly as well. It was already in my system. Being extravagant and spending money on a taxi was already in my system. I shouldn't do this. What my dad did in that moment was reinforce that in such a way that it traumatized me. And when I say traumatized me, I remember once I had a client, I'd walked out of my office, I thought I had a 2-hour break. It's a lovely sunny day in London, we don't get many of them, I thought I'm going to go for a walk. I walk up the park, I'm literally 30 minutes away from my office, and my secretary rings, said, your client is here. Client? Now that was trauma. I could not get in a taxi. That's how traumatized I was. I could not get in a cab to get back in time. I ran, and then this is trauma. I got lost. Absolutely lost. You know, so this is what I'm saying about how trauma affects us. I'd gone offline, totally offline here. I'm running around like that sort of, headless chicken. Yes, I'll take a shortcut down here and then think, where am I? Physically, the tension, the fear, and I get into the office and the client looked at me and said, Chris, I can't stay, because I thought she could have stayed a bit longer. She said, I can't stay. Like soaking wet. It's okay, I'm fine. I'm really, really fine. That's the trauma reaction. And I'm an adult. I know I'm an adult. It's not like I'm a young child frightened of something. But in that moment, that's how severe my reaction to black cabs or getting a black cab were. Now let's look at this, how it affects us in relationships. So my dad passes his trauma onto me. He transmitted it into me. What about relationships? We've talked about LGBT plus, we've talked about all these things, today. The fear that people feel around difference, that is transmitted transgenerational trauma. We are so afraid of difference. And understandably, if you think a couple of thousands of years ago, difference was scary. If you walked into the wrong tribe, it was game over for you. But so this is really really embedded in who we are. But then it's reinforced. It's reinforced in community, in society. It's reinforced in media. Everybody is beautiful. Everybody is young. Everybody is rich. And everybody's happy. In fact, they don't need us. So all these things are reinforced. We're not supposed to have trauma, We're not supposed to feel sad or upset, We're supposed to be all very normal. The reality is we live in a traumatized society. You know, we spoke about, people disconnecting. You know, you do think of a mobile phone, it's a thing to connect us, but it should be called a thing to disconnect us. How often do you see people and I do it myself. Somebody was talking to me the other day and the phone rang and I answered the phone. And I thought, what am I doing? You know? And when I looked at what I was doing, I was, obviously not disconnected, but I was actually being verbally abusive to the person I was with. I was saying, shut up. I'm busy. I'm important. I'm a therapist. You know, we look at all these things we do. How often you've gone for dinner and you sit on the dinner, put your phone on the table, and someone's telling you something, you think, oh, really, I've heard this before. And you pick, yeah. Oh, Candy Crush. Oh, Grinder. We all do it, and this is sort of, these sort of transgenerational responses. It's not a response in the here and now. It's something. There's a fear. There's a need to disconnect. So the one thing, as I said at the beginning, the one thing we need more than anything to survive is connection. Without connection, you think of a little baby Chris. Oh, get on my nerves. I put baby Chris in the corner, and I forget about him. Yeah? How long is he going to survive? You'd look after him. You'd be over this way. No, but how long would he survive? You know? It's quite warm in here, he'd probably get thirsty, dehydrate. Be lucky if he's still there tomorrow morning, alive. Because we need connection from the get-go. I think we need connection and help longer than any other mammal, don't we? You know, I think so, I can't remember. Our parents and their parents, connection was very, very different. You know, as I said from my own story, there were times as a child when we didn't have enough food on the table. I mean, 9 mouths is a lot to fill, isn't it, you know? And it was difficult. So my trauma around food, for example, I can go home late at night when I just want to go to bed. There's cwtchin, it's a Welsh word, cwtch, cwtchin to bed, there, And all of a sudden, I'll go to the fridge, open the fridge, block of cheese, loads of bread, loads of butter. I lay me, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. That's because it's a trauma reaction. By finding out what's going on in the family origins of our clients, I promise you, you will help them discover why they have the certain processes and addictions they have. Most addictions tell us a lot about the person in front of us. What we become addicted to is there's a reason we become addicted to certain things. I always say this, I believe that the first addiction we have is love. Because if we don't get love, we look for love addiction. We look for somebody to replace that. The second is food. The third is sex. And after that, then it's gang-o anywhere you want to go. You will use other things for different reasons. And the reason I look at it this way is that if I go home late at night, I'm on my own, there's nobody there to connect to me. Oh, it's quite sad, really, isn't it? And it's late at night, I've worked hard, I've helped loads of people, I'm good. The first thing I look for is comfort. There's nobody going to give me comfort, because I'll sleep. So I start comforting myself, because when I was a little boy, do you know what my parents used to do when I needed comfort? Remember, there's 8 other children. They would give me bread and jam. And I'd eat it. Oh, my mother loves me. And then I got a little bit older, my dad would give me bread and cheese. And now, it is cruel. I booked into a hotel, and there's a little lovely cheese shop opposite me. I thought, what are you doing to me, universe? Huh? I hope it's closed tonight. So working with transgenerational trauma, finding out what was going on in the family. And how do we do that? We ask them, you know. We do a family of origin. Do any of you use family of origin forms? Yeah, you just do. Yeah. And again, you can have these online. But family of origin shows us what's going on in the family. And the important thing here is you're always looking for the family, the role. I think the lady before us, she had family roles. Whatever the role in the family, it's important to discover because that is the adapted role. You know? When we adapt, so a trauma reaction is something from childhood. Who has trauma reactions to anything? Come on, share with me. What's yours, Dave? A man who is loud. What happens when a man is loud? Really? So when your dad was being loud, it wasn't a question of what he'd be, it was a question of what was going to happen next. So what would be the emotion you'd be feeling? Fear. Fear. So you see, even today, that fear is still there. Yeah? When we sit down with our clients, the reason I asked about therapists and doctors and what roles you have, anybody working with people, we are blessed. We are truly, truly blessed to sit down and people trust us with some of the most personal, the most difficult, the most painful things they can trust us with. Now, my role is to actually make sure that I have done everything I can to contain and honor that trust. Now, Dave just shared that he, as a reaction, that fear comes up when there's a loud man. If I don't know my stuff, and then Dave has that fear, if I'm not aware of my stuff, I will pick up on that. And if my fear is similar, if I'm frightened of loud men, am I going to go anywhere near it? I'm going to guide him all the way around it. The good thing for the therapist, they'll be with you for years, which means you've got a good business. But the reality is it doesn't help the client. So working with developmental trauma, there's several ways to do it. Family of origin stuff and inner child work is very, very good. I'll tell you I love inner child work is because we start to reparent ourselves. I cannot go back into the past and change anything for myself, and I can't do that for my clients. If I could, I would, but I can't. What I can do now, and this is wonderful about inner child work, when I have a trauma reaction, I can actually start nurturing myself. I can visualize little Chris. Oh, I'm again, sorry. I can start visualizing little Chris and think, okay, what's going on here? Say, right, I know you're afraid. I know you're scared. He's a big, scary man. But I've got you and you're okay. And we can run. No. And sometimes the reality is that maybe we need to run. Maybe we need to exit something. Where I couldn't run as a child. Another way I love working, I don't know if any of you are aware of the NARM model, the Neuroaffective Relational Model, NARM. NARM is a way of working as a top-down, bottom-up. NARM work is about working towards the life force. We want to move towards the life force. Traumatized people have disconnected from their life force. They're frightened to they're not sure about being in the world because the world is a scary place to be. So NARM looks at the life force, looks at where the structure. You could be shame-based. You can be pride-based. And it's about really monitoring. I keep doing it, looking at bodies, looking at how people's feet are going, and we really are in that moment to moment, to start to develop, I can't remember what it is. Regulation. Good God. I haven't got much of it today. Because again, once we're in a traumatic state, we've lost all sense of ourselves. You think of me running around London. But it's not around London, it's around 3 or 4 streets in London. Let's be realistic about this. And I was lost. I was like those mouse in those little boxes, I was in Mouse Park and I couldn't get out, So here we are in this situation where top down, bottom up. It's because we remember everything. Our bodies are, our clients sitting in front of us give us so much information, that unconscious movement, that just that slight looking down, it's all these things that we do, You see when they've zoned out at different things, when they slightly disassociate, where you're talking about a different subject, when the lights are on but nobody's in, it's that type of thing. And we need to be in that moment by moment by moment. Another favorite model, I think, is EMDR, and we were talking about this earlier on. EMDR is, do you want to say what it is, Sebastian? Yeah. Eye movement. We were laughing about EMDR. Do you know EMDR? Yeah. I was saying about his, that client that sort of, so my client told me I looked like a 70s star, a 70s dance star, which I took as him getting better, because I never saw him after that. So, where are we with this? So, working with transgenerational trauma. The emotions that we need to be aware of are the shame that comes up with it. Because when people are traumatized, especially, even an accident can shame a person. A car accident, oh, why was I driving so fast? Why was I there? What was I doing? All this guilt and shame, And there's this, if only I took the metro. This is someone who's never took the metro in their life, But we started rationalizing, and and that's what trauma does to us. When we go close to it, we go a little bit mad, So it's looking at working with the shame, because you think of little kids, and all our clients are adult children. They really, really are. They come in, and if you see them in that space, you can really start to feel, you feel that love for them. You start to connect them in a different way, You look at this, work with finding the family of origin, everything you can, and accepting their reality, unless it's absolutely bizarre, unless they say, I was dropped by an alien, then you say, well, what was that about? But it's really looking at accepting their reality and their experience of something, The only time I will challenge someone's reality is if they say, oh yeah, Dad beat me with a belt every day, but he didn't mean it. It's just what they did in those days, That's what people say, Then you challenge the reality. But if you take on board their reality, working with the shame and the guilt, and working with the sort of, the cognitive and the body, and I think that's about all we can work with. I was going to say something else, I can't remember what it is. I think I'm a little bit of a trauma reaction. I've gone offline, But that's okay. There's always next year. I'm going to leave it there, because I really, really can't remember what I was going to say. But that's okay. Now, I'm just going to share something with you. Trauma erodes our self-esteem. When our clients come into us, and they've had, especially developmental trauma, they've been bullied, or they felt they're no good, they've been made to feel they're no good. No matter how confident they're there, they might be the CEO, they might be an actor, an actress, a sports star, they might be the woman from the cafe, or you see she's very confident, or he's very confident. Remember this, they are sitting there because their self-esteem has been eroded. Doing this work on yourselves, right? Not so long ago, forgetting where I am and forgetting my slides and being a bit mad and everything would have really said, I would have been like this, oh my God. Today I can say to myself, okay, I could have prepared a little bit better. You know, it wouldn't have been so much fun for me. No, no. I could have prepared a little bit better. You know, I could have shiny slides. But I'm okay. I really am okay. And I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you.